Before we begin, we'd like to ask you to tell us your name and the city you're watching from. We love getting to know our audience. Also, please don't forget to give this video a like, share it with others, and subscribe to our channel. That way, we can keep bringing you more stories like this one. The Atlantic had never been so quiet. Captain Elias Montalvo stood at the helm of the Santa Esperanza, his weathered hands gripping the worn wood with the familiarity of 6 decades at sea. At 82 years old, his body was a map of scars and stories, each line on his face carved by salt wind, each callus on his palms a testament to ropes pulled and storms survived. The pre-dawn darkness wrapped around his small cargo vessel like a shroud, broken only by the faint glow of the compass light and the distant promise of sunrise bleeding at the horizon's edge. The crew was minimal, just 4 men who'd stuck with him through lean years and leaner profits. Marco, his first mate, a Brazilian with kind eyes and a pragmatic soul. Chen, the navigator, silent and efficient, and the Rodriguez brothers, twins from Puerto Rico who worked the deck with synchronized precision born from shared blood. They were good men, loyal men, but they were tired. The Santa Esperanza was no longer a vessel of adventure. It was a floating retirement home for sailors who had nowhere else to go. Elias had accepted this reality years ago. The world had moved on without him. Modern shipping companies, with their massive container vessels and GPS systems, had rendered men like him obsolete. His roots were the forgotten ones, small deliveries between obscure ports along the eastern seaboard, cargo that nobody else wanted to bother with, medical supplies to remote communities, mail to lighthouses, replacement parts for aging fishing boats. It wasn't glory, but it was honest work, and it kept him on the water where he belonged. But tonight, something felt different. The ocean had a quality he recognized from his younger days, a held breath before chaos, the kind of stillness that preceded hurricanes or miracles. He'd learned long ago not to ignore such feelings. The sea spoke to those who knew how to listen, and Elias had been listening for most of his life. "Captain," Marco's voice cut through the darkness, rough with concern. "You should see this." Elias turned to find his first mate pointing starboard, where the first pale fingers of dawn were beginning to paint the water. At first he saw nothing, just the endless roll of waves, the same hypnotic rhythm that had accompanied every voyage of his life. Then he saw it. Debris, scattered planks of wood, a torn sail drifting like a ghost, the unmistakable signature of a vessel destroyed. "Wreckage," Chen confirmed, appearing at the rail with binoculars. "Recent, maybe hours old. Looks like a schooner, medium-sized. No survivors visible." The Rodriguez brothers emerged from below deck, drawn by the change in the ship's rhythm. Everyone gathered at the rail, scanning the floating graveyard, with the practiced eyes of men who'd seen too many disasters at sea. This was the part of ocean life that never got easier, the stark reminder that the water gave no mercy, made no exceptions. Rich or poor, experienced or novice, the sea took what it wanted. "We should mark the position and report it when we reach port," Marco said quietly. It was the sensible thing to do. They had a schedule to keep, limited fuel, and no resources for a proper search and rescue operation. The Coast Guard would handle it. That was protocol. But Elias's eyes had found something else. There, maybe 200 yards off the starboard bow, bobbing between the debris, a shape, too deliberate to be driftwood, too still to be alive, but unmistakably human. "There," he pointed. "Someone's in the water." Marco raised the binoculars, then lowered them slowly, his expression grim. "Dead, most likely, Captain. We can't—" "Bring us around," Elias interrupted, his voice carrying the weight of command that age and exhaustion couldn't diminish. "Slow approach. Prepare the rescue hook. Captain Montalvo." Marco's tone became pleading. "We don't have medical supplies for a corpse recovery. We're 3 days from port. If there's a body, it's been in the water too long. We should—" "I said bring us around." Elias's eyes never left the floating figure. Something in his gut, that same instinct that had kept him alive through storms and pirates and mechanical failures, told him this mattered, that this moment was a hinge upon which something larger would turn. He'd ignored such feelings before, early in his career, and people had died. He wouldn't make that mistake again. The crew exchanged glances but moved to obey. The Santa Esperanza was no democracy. On the water, the captain's word was law, even when that law defied common sense. They'd all sailed under worse commanders and survived worse decisions. If the old man wanted to play hero for a corpse, so be it. As they drew closer, details emerged. It was a young man, maybe 20 years old, floating face up among the wreckage. His clothes were torn, his skin pale, but there was something about him that didn't fit the picture of a simple drowning victim. His position in the water was too deliberate, his body too intact, and around his neck, catching the first rays of sunlight, something gleamed, a pendant or medallion, intricate and old. "Get the hook ready," Elias commanded, bringing the vessel alongside with the careful precision of a man who'd performed this maneuver 1,000 times. "Chen, stand by with the winch." Brothers prepared to haul him aboard. They worked in practiced silence, the kind of coordination that came from years of shared labor. The hook caught the young man's torn shirt, and slowly, carefully, they pulled him from the ocean's embrace. Water streamed from his body as they laid him on the deck. A broken bird returned to a nest it would never leave. Elias knelt beside him, his old knees protesting, and pressed 2 fingers against the young man's neck. For a long moment he felt nothing, just cold skin and the memory of life. Then, faint as a whisper, barely distinguishable from his own hopeful imagination, a pulse. "He's alive," Elias breathed. "Marco, get blankets. Chen, warm water and whatever medical supplies we have. Move." The crew sprang into action, their earlier reluctance replaced by the urgency of a life that might still be saved. As they worked, Elias studied the young man's face. There was something familiar about him, though they'd never met. Not in his features, but in his expression, even unconscious. There was a quality of determination, of someone who'd chosen to survive against impossible odds. And then Elias noticed them, the markings. Starting at the young man's collarbone and disappearing beneath his torn shirt were intricate lines, patterns that looked like tattoos, but had the precision of something else, something deliberate and cartographic. His breath caught as recognition dawned. These weren't decorations, they were coordinates, a map, inked or branded directly onto human skin. "Dios mío," Marco whispered, seeing them too. "What kind of man carries a map on his body?" "The kind someone wants very badly to find," Elias replied quietly, a cold certainty settling in his chest. "Or the kind someone wants very badly to kill." The young man's eyes suddenly flew open, not gradually, not with the confusion of someone waking, but with the sharp clarity of someone who'd been conscious all along, playing dead, waiting. His hand shot out and grabbed Elias's wrist with surprising strength. "Don't!" the young man gasped, his voice raw from salt water and screaming. "Don't! Take me to port. They're coming. They're always coming." Then his eyes rolled back and he collapsed again into true unconsciousness, leaving Elias kneeling on the deck with the weight of a stranger's desperate warning and the certainty that by saving this young man's life, he'd just condemned them all. The sun broke fully over the horizon, painting the ocean gold and red, beautiful and terrible, like the promise of blood on water. The young man's name was Samuel, and he woke screaming. It happened just after dawn, as Elias sat in his cramped cabin reviewing their dwindling fuel reserves and trying to calculate if they had enough to divert to the nearest Coast Guard station. The scream tore through the Santa Esperanza like a knife through canvas. Raw, primal, the sound of someone reliving their own death. Elias was on his feet and moving before his conscious mind had fully registered the noise, his old body remembering the urgency of crisis, even when his bones protested. He found Samuel in the crew quarters, tangled in the blankets they'd wrapped him in, his eyes wide and unfocused, still trapped somewhere between the ocean and whatever nightmare had followed him from it. Marco was already there, trying to calm him with a steady stream of Portuguese and gentle hands. But the young man was beyond comfort. He fought like a cornered animal, striking out at shadows only he could see. "Easy, son," Elias said firmly, moving into Samuel's line of sight. "You're safe. You're on the Santa Esperanza. The water can't reach you here." Something in his voice, perhaps the absolute certainty of command, perhaps the timbre of age that suggested survival, cut through Samuel's panic. His wild movements slowed, then stopped. He stared at Elias with the intensity of someone trying to determine if he was real or just another phantom conjured by trauma and salt. "How long?" Samuel's voice was a rasp, his throat clearly damaged from salt water and screaming. "How long have I been here?" "6 hours," Elias replied, pulling up a stool and sitting with the deliberate slowness of someone trying not to spook a frightened horse. "We found you at dawn, floating in wreckage. Your ship, what happened?" Samuel's face went carefully blank, the kind of controlled neutrality that came from practice and necessity. "I don't remember. It was a lie, and not even a good one." His eyes betrayed him, flickering with memories too vivid to be forgotten. "Son," Elias said quietly, "I've been sailing these waters since before your parents were born. I know the difference between a man who can't remember and a man who won't. And given that you've got half a treasure map tattooed on your chest, I'd say the truth matters right about now." Samuel's hand instinctively moved to his collarbone, covering the visible edge of the markings. His jaw tightened. For a long moment, the only sound was the gentle creak of the ship and the eternal whisper of water against hull. Then, slowly, he made a decision. Elias could see it happen. The moment when survival instinct calculated that honesty might be the only currency that mattered anymore. "They came at midnight," Samuel said finally, his voice distant. "The Mariana's Revenge. That was my ship, a research vessel, legally registered, carrying nothing but scientific equipment and marine samples. We weren't pirates, we weren't smugglers, we were trying to prove something." He laughed bitterly, "trying to find something that everyone said didn't exist." "And did you find it?" Elias asked. Samuel met his eyes. "Yes. God help us. We found it. And then they found us." Marco shifted uncomfortably. "Who found you? Pirates? Coast Guard?" "Worse," Samuel whispered. "The Brotherhood of the Broken Compass. You've heard of them?" The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Even Chen, who rarely showed emotion, went pale. The Rodriguez brothers, who'd been listening from the doorway, crossed themselves in unison. Everyone who worked these waters knew the stories. A pirate fleet unlike any other, not unified by treasure or territory but by something older and darker. They were the descendants of crews who'd been betrayed, abandoned, left to die on cursed waters. They sailed under black flags and answered to no government, no law, no mercy. Most sailors dismissed them as legend, the kind of boogeyman story told to scare rookies and explain disappearances that had simpler explanations. But Elias had seen them once, 30 years ago, from a distance, a fleet of mismatched vessels sailing in perfect formation, moving with purpose that defied their ragtag appearance. He'd been young enough then to think about investigating, old enough to know better. He'd turned his ship around and never spoken of it to anyone who mattered. "They're real," Elias confirmed, more to his crew than to Samuel. "And if they're hunting you, we have a problem." "You don't understand," Samuel said urgently, sitting up despite his obvious pain. "They're not just hunting me. They're hunting this." He pulled aside his torn shirt, revealing the full extent of the markings on his torso. They covered his chest, his ribs, his shoulders, an intricate web of coordinates, symbols, and navigational markers that looked like they'd been burned into his skin with impossible precision. "My mentor, Dr. Catherine Reeves, she discovered the location of the Leviathan's Tithe, the lost treasure fleet of 1715. Not the one everyone knows about. The real one. The ships that carried something more valuable than gold." "What could be more valuable than gold to a pirate?" Marco asked skeptically. Samuel's smile was grim. "Freedom. The Leviathan's Tithe carried pardon papers, signed amnesty documents from the Spanish crown for every pirate who'd sworn allegiance during the War of Spanish Succession. Authentic papers that could still, theoretically, be honored through historical treaties. Papers that would legitimize the Brotherhood, make them untouchable by international law. Dr. Reeves found them, and before the Brotherhood could take her research, she encoded the location. On me." "Why you?" Chen asked quietly. "Because I was her son," Samuel said simply. "And because she knew I'd rather die than let them have it. She was right. They sank the Mariana's Revenge and killed everyone aboard. I went into the water before they could get their hands on me. I was supposed to die. I wanted to die. But the ocean had other plans." Elias stood slowly, his mind racing through calculations and consequences. "How many ships did you see? How close were they?" "I counted 20 vessels before I went overboard," Samuel said. "But the Brotherhood doesn't travel in small numbers. If 20 found us, there are more. Many more. And they'll be searching for survivors. Searching for me." As if summoned by prophecy, the ship's radio crackled to life. Chen moved to answer it, but before he could reach the receiver, a voice filled the cabin, deep, accented with the cadence of old Haitian Creole, carrying the weight of someone accustomed to being obeyed. To the vessel that plucks drowning rats from the sea, we know what you carry. We know his name. Return Samuel Reeves to the water where we left him, and sail away with your lives and your honor intact. Keep him, and learn why the Brotherhood does not forgive, does not forget, and does not negotiate. The transmission ended. Silence filled the cabin like floodwater, heavy and suffocating. Elias moved to the porthole and looked out at the ocean. The early morning sun painted everything in shades of gold and blue, peaceful and eternal. But he knew what he was looking for. And there, at the very edge of visibility, he saw them. Sails, dozens of them, spreading across the horizon like a disease, black and deliberate, moving with the coordinated precision of a military operation. They were still distant, maybe an hour away at current speed, but they were coming. And there were so many, more than 20, more than 50. As his eyes adjusted and he counted, his blood ran cold. "Marco," he said quietly, "get me the long-range binoculars. Now." His first mate obeyed, hands shaking slightly as he retrieved the equipment. Elias raised the binoculars and swept the horizon methodically, counting flags, estimating tonnage, identifying vessel types, schooners, brigantines, modern fishing boats retrofitted for combat, even what looked like a decommissioned Coast Guard cutter, repainted and repurposed. They came from every direction, tightening a noose that had been carefully planned. When he finished counting, he lowered the binoculars with hands that didn't shake, not from courage, but from the strange calm that came with accepting the impossible. "How many?" Marco asked, though his tone suggested he didn't really want to know. Elias turned to face his crew and the young man who'd brought death to their doorstep. His voice was steady, carrying the weight of 6 decades at sea and the certainty that this morning would define the rest of his life, however long that might be. 1,342, he said. "Give or take. They've sent their entire fleet, every ship, every man, for one boy with a map on his skin." Samuel started to speak, probably to apologize, probably to offer to surrender, but Elias raised a hand, silencing him. "The question before us is simple," the old captain continued. "Do we give them what they want and pray they honor their word? Or do we remember why men go to sea in the first place? Because on land, we're told who we have to be. Out here, we choose." The Rodriguez brothers looked at each other, having one of those silent conversations that only twins could manage. Then the younger one, Ricardo, spoke for both of them. "We choose to sail with you, Captain. Whatever comes." Chen simply nodded, his usual silence saying everything that needed to be said. Marco stared at the horizon, at the approaching darkness, then at Elias. "You remember what happened the last time you defied pirates, old friend? You lost everything. Your ship, your reputation, your—" "My son," Elias finished quietly. "Yes, Marco. I remember. Every day I remember. And every day I wonder if doing the right thing was worth the price I paid." He looked at Samuel, seeing not a stranger, but a second chance, an opportunity to rewrite an ending that had haunted him for 30 years. "Maybe today I find out." Samuel was crying now, silent tears cutting through the salt residue on his face. "I'm not worth this. I'm not worth any of this. Just give me to them. Please, I can't have more blood on my hands." "That's not your choice to make," Elias said firmly. "Your crew now, and I don't abandon my crew, not again, not ever again." He turned to Marco. "Signal the Coast Guard, tell them everything, then disable the radio." "Disable it? Captain, that's our only—" "Do it. The Brotherhood will be monitoring our transmissions. I want them to know we called for help, and I want them to know we're not running." As Marco moved to obey, Elias walked to the helm, his hands finding their familiar grooves in the wood. Through the windscreen he could see them now without binoculars, a black stain spreading across the perfect blue, 1,000 ships carrying 10,000 men who'd chosen damnation over submission. The Santa Esperanza was 42 feet of aging wood and failing engines. She carried 4 loyal men, 1 terrified boy, and a captain who'd already lost everything that mattered once before. The odds were impossible, the outcome inevitable. But as Elias checked their heading and felt the wind change direction, a small mercy from an indifferent ocean, he smiled, Because after 30 years of safe routes and careful choices, after 3 decades of survival without purpose, he finally felt alive again. "Gentlemen," he announced, his voice carrying the ring of command that made scared men brave. "Battle stations. Today we teach the Brotherhood something they've forgotten, that the ocean doesn't belong to the strong. It belongs to the stubborn, and nobody's more stubborn than an old man with nothing left to lose." The black horizon continued its approach, inevitable as a storm, patient as death, and the Santa Esperanza sailed to meet it. The Brotherhood arrived with the rising sun at their backs, a calculated intimidation that turned their black sails into shadows against blinding light. They didn't attack immediately. That would have been merciful, quick, wasteful of the terror they'd so carefully cultivated. Instead, they simply surrounded the Santa Esperanza in concentric circles, layer upon layer of ships forming a nautical prison with no gaps, no hope, no escape routes that hadn't already been considered and sealed. Elias watched them settle into formation with the detached appreciation of a man who understood tactics. This wasn't rage or chaos. This was military precision dressed in pirate colors. Someone was in command who understood that fear was sharpest when given time to mature, that trapped men made mistakes when allowed to contemplate their doom. He respected the strategy even as he counted the minutes until it killed them all. "Captain," Chen's voice was barely a whisper, "the forward vessels are dropping anchor. They're going to wait us out." "Let them wait," Elias replied, though his hands tightened on the wheel. "Samuel, stay below deck, out of sight. If they can't confirm you're here, they have to negotiate." But Samuel had already emerged, drawn by the terrible magnetism of seeing his death arranged in such spectacular fashion. He stood at the rail, staring at the fleet with the hollow eyes of someone who'd stopped feeling fear because there was no room left inside him for any emotion at all. "There's no negotiation," Samuel said flatly. "The Brotherhood doesn't bargain. They take. They've been taking for 300 years. Why would today be different?" "Because today they want something they can't just take," Elias answered. "They need you alive, at least long enough to extract that map. Dead men don't remember coordinates. Burned skin doesn't reveal secrets written in scar tissue that requires the living body's heat to read properly." "Yes, I noticed. Those aren't tattoos. They're thermographic markers. Clever." Samuel turned, surprised. "How did you—" "Son, I've been on the water longer than you've been alive. You think this is the first encoded treasure map I've seen? It's not even the strangest." Elias kept his eyes on the fleet, watching for movement, for signals, for the moment when patience would crack into violence. "Your mother was brilliant. Hiding the map on you protects it from theft and ensures anyone who wants it has to keep you breathing. It's insurance, and insurance is leverage." The radio crackled again. The same voice from before, but closer now, intimate, as if the speaker stood beside them rather than on a ship 300 yards away. "Captain Montalvo. Yes, we know your name. We know everything about you. Hero of the Charleston hurricane. Savior of the stranded. The man who once chose honor over survival and paid for it with his son's life. We know your ghosts, old man. We know what haunts you when the water is quiet and the stars remember." Elias felt his crew turn to look at him, questions in their eyes that he'd never answered in all their years together. Marco especially. His first mate had always suspected there was more to the captain's history than cargo routes and retirement, but had respected the silence that surrounded certain topics. Now that silence was being weaponized against them. "We offer you a choice," the voice continued, "but it's not the choice you think. We don't want the boy dead. We want him functional. We'll pay you $1 million American, transferred to any account you specify. In exchange, you deliver Samuel Reeves to us unharmed. You sail away rich. Your crew sails away alive. And you get to tell yourself that at least this time, you saved the men under your command." The silence that followed was heavier than the ocean. $1 million. For men who counted their earnings in hundreds, who worked aging vessels because they couldn't afford better, who faced retirement with the certainty of poverty, it was salvation. It was everything. Marco's face showed the calculation happening in real time. The Rodriguez brothers wouldn't meet anyone's eyes. Even Chen, stoic Chen, swallowed hard. "Captain," Marco said carefully, we should discuss this. As a crew." "There's nothing to discuss," Elias replied, but his voice lacked conviction. "Because there was something to discuss. These men had families, lives beyond this ship. Dreams that didn't include dying for a stranger's map. What right did he have to make that choice for them? I'll go, Samuel said suddenly. Just let me go to them. You don't need to hand me over. I'll swim. Shut up, Elias snapped, surprising everyone including himself. You think this is about you? You think your noble sacrifice means anything to men who've built an empire on taking what they want? He turned to his crew, seeing them truly, not as sailors under his command, but as human beings with the right to choose their own deaths. Marco, brothers Chen, I can't make this decision for you. The Brotherhood is offering money and life. I'm offering, well, I'm not sure what I'm offering except the satisfaction of telling pirates to go to hell. Put it to a vote. Democracy. Right now. The crew exchanged glances. Marco spoke first, his voice thick with conflict. Captain, I have a daughter. She's 7. She needs... I know, Elias said gently. I know what she needs. Vote your conscience, old friend. No judgment. Not from me. Not from anyone. Marco closed his eyes. When he opened them, they were wet. My daughter needs to know her father was a good man, that he stood for something when it mattered. Even if, especially if, it cost him everything. He straightened. I vote we fight. The Rodriguez brothers didn't hesitate. Fight, they said in unison, their voices steady. Chen simply nodded once, his silence speaking volumes. Elias felt something break open in his chest. Not grief, but its opposite. Pride. The kind of fierce, terrible pride that came from knowing you'd earned the loyalty of good men through something more than fear or obligation. He wanted to thank them. Wanted to tell them they were insane. Wonderful. Doomed. But before he could speak, the radio crackled one final time. Your silence is answer enough, Captain. We'll give you 1 hour to reconsider. After that, we stop being patient. After that, we remind the ocean why it fears our flags. 1 hour. Use it wisely. The transmission ended. Around them, the Brotherhood fleet began to move. Not attacking, but repositioning, tightening formation, preparing for whatever violence they'd been commanded to unleash when the clock ran down. Elias checked his watch. 9:47 a.m. They had until 10:47 to live, plan, or pray. Samuel, he said quietly, I need you to tell me everything about that map. Every detail. If we're going to die for it, I'd like to know what it leads to. Samuel nodded slowly and began to speak, his voice gaining strength as he shared his mother's final research, her discoveries, the reason the Brotherhood would burn the world to possess what lived on his skin. And as he talked, as the crew listened, as the sun climbed higher and the hour counted down, Elias began to form something that might, if luck and the ocean favored old men, almost resemble a plan. It was insane, impossible, the longest of long shots. But then again, so was everything else about this morning. The plan was simple in the way that suicide missions often were: create chaos, exploit it, and pray that confusion bought enough time for the impossible to become merely improbable. Elias had 20 minutes left when he gathered his crew for final instructions. They stood in a circle on the deck, the morning sun now fully overhead. The Brotherhood fleet so close they could hear voices carrying across the water. Laughter, orders, the casual conversation of men certain of their victory. The map on Samuel's chest doesn't just show where the Leviathan's tithe is hidden, Elias began. It shows where it isn't. His mother created a failsafe. The coordinates are incomplete without a second key that only Samuel knows. Without it, they'll sail in circles forever. Samuel nodded. She made me memorize it. Latitude and longitude of our family home in Wilmington. Without those numbers, the map is useless. Which means they need you cooperative, not just alive, Marco said. That's our leverage. Exactly, Elias confirmed. Chen, how much fuel do we have? Maybe 3 hours at full speed, less if we push the engines. We're going to push them past tolerance, past safety, until they fail or explode. We'll make them think we're running, draw the fastest ships away from the main fleet, and then we turn. Directly into them. Full collision course. The Rodriguez brothers grinned, the kind of crazy smiles that suggested they'd been waiting their whole lives for such an order. Marco looked sick but determined. Chen simply calculated angles and speeds, already solving the geometric problem of controlled destruction. Samuel, when they board us, you jump. East side, away from the fleet. You swim as far and as deep as you can. The currents will pull you away from the chaos. I can't just leave you all to... You can and you will, Elias interrupted. Because if you're captured, everything we're about to do means nothing. Your mother died protecting that map. Don't insult us by wasting it. The radio crackled. 10 minutes, Captain. We're growing impatient. Marco, fire up the engines, Elias commanded. Chen, plot a course through their thinnest formation line. Brothers, prepare the auxiliary tanks. Let's give them a chase. The Santa Esperanza roared to life, her ancient engines protesting but obeying. Elias felt the ship gather herself for one final run. Around them, the Brotherhood fleet reacted. Signal flags rising, the fastest vessels peeling off to give chase like wolves after wounded prey. Now! Elias shouted, and they exploded forward. The old vessel wasn't built for speed, but she gave everything she had left. They cut through the water at angles that made the hull groan, pushed engines beyond capacity, and left a wake of churning foam. Behind them, a dozen pirate ships gave chase. Sleek, modern, faster in every way. They're gaining, Chen reported. 2 minutes until boarding range. Samuel, get ready, Elias ordered. When I give the signal, you go, no hesitation. The young man positioned himself at the rail, his body tense. His eyes met Elias's, and a lifetime of gratitude passed between them. Thank you, Samuel said, for seeing me as worth saving. Thank you for reminding me why I became a sailor in the first place. Then the engines screamed. A mechanical death rattle. Elias spun the wheel hard, turning the Santa Esperanza in an arc that physics said was impossible, that desperation said was their only chance. The ship responded, shuddering, listing, but completing the turn. They were now facing the pursuit fleet head-on. Now! Elias roared, and Samuel jumped. He hit the water and disappeared beneath the surface just as the Santa Esperanza struck the lead vessel amidships with catastrophic force. Wood splintered. Metal shrieked. Men shouted in panic as both vessels began to sink. Pirates swarmed aboard, expecting resistance, finding instead an old man standing calmly at the helm of a dying ship. Where is he? The Brotherhood commander demanded. A tall man with scars that told stories of survived violence. Where's the boy? Elias smiled. Gone. Swimming toward a horizon you'll never reach. The commander grabbed Elias by the collar. Tell me which direction or I'll make your death last days. I'm 82 years old, Elias said calmly. I've already had more days than I deserved. But let me tell you something about the ocean. She doesn't care about your threats. She doesn't respect your flags. She takes what she wants, and no amount of ships will ever change that. Before the commander could respond, Marco tackled him, then Chen, then the Rodriguez brothers. The deck erupted into combat, old sailors using every dirty trick they'd learned to hold off trained killers. They lasted long enough for Samuel to swim beyond search patterns, long enough for the Santa Esperanza to slip beneath the waves, taking with her any evidence of which direction the boy had chosen. Elias felt the water rise around him as the ship settled with dignity. Around him, his crew fought and fell, buying seconds with their lives, paying the cost they'd voted to accept. The last thing Captain Elias Montalvo saw was the horizon. Endless. Blue. Free. And somewhere beyond it, a young man swimming toward a future that old sailors had purchased with everything they had. It was a good death, the kind his son would have understood, the kind that made 6 decades at sea mean something more than survival. The Brotherhood searched for 3 days, finding nothing. Samuel Reeves disappeared into the vastness that had always protected those the sea chose to keep secret, and in the depths where sunlight faded to darkness, the Santa Esperanza rested, her old bones finally at peace.